I think we'll get going now. Seems like the bulk of people are joined, but no doubt people will join in dribs and drabs over the next couple of minutes. So my name is Guy Battle. I'm the Chief Executive of Social Value Portal, and I'm going to be chairing this session. And today is actually the third session we've got on real estate. In fact, originally we covered a section on planning, then we had a session on construction, and this one in particular, we're going to be having a conversation about asset management. Before I introduce the speakers, we do have a quick poll for those who are with us, just to pick up the attendance. But before I do that, we have running Q&A. So just in terms of the format, I'm going to introduce the speakers. Then we've got the speakers will each speak for about 5 minutes or so. Then I'm going to sort of offer some questions up to our panelists, and then I'm going to invite Q&A. So as we go through this, please drop your questions into the Q&A so that we can then sort of access those during the session itself, and I can then pull them up and begin to ask them of the panelists. So I think we've got a poll now. Yes, thank you very much. So we just want to, I think it's 1 or 2 questions we have. Yeah. So the opening poll really, if you could just tell us what your role is, so we just get a sense of the audience. So are you an asset manager? Are you in FM, fund management, an investor, developer, consultant? Are you from the public sector, or are you none of the above? Other. Okay, Tom, I'm sure people know what they're doing, so we probably don't need them too long for that. Okay, so we should have spent more time, Tom, on the other bits other than so we obviously misguessed. Well, goodness knows what other people are. So it might be good to kick off the chat Q&A with just telling us what the other means to those 37%, 16 of you where we haven't put down a number. So great. Thank you very much. Is that it? Do we have another poll, Tom, or is that so fun?
No, that's the only poll we got for this session.
Good stuff. Okay, so let's dive into the discussion itself. And of course, as I mentioned, this is stage or sort of webinar 3 of this series, where we've covered the full life cycle of an asset. So we've looked at planning, we've looked at construction, now we're in asset management, and it's worth just for a couple of moments just understanding why the asset management piece is so important. So when you look at the total social value being delivered through the lifetime of a real estate asset, it's sort of principally delivered through 3 parts. The first part is through the construction phase. That would include designers. So that generally makes up about 15% of the total social value over a 10-year lifespan or a 10-year period of measurement. You then move into the in-use phase, and there's 2 parts to that. One is how the management, assuming there's a property management team, so there might be a workplace and facilities management team that is managing the asset. So they roughly deliver 10 or 15% of the total social value sort of footprint. But then the vast majority comes from the occupier, which is 70 to 75% made up of sort of how they engage with their communities. So when we're looking at those stages, the asset management, which includes the facilities management team and the occupier, can make up as much as 80 or 85% of the total value, social value delivered by that asset. That is the reason why it's so important to understand how an asset can be measured, how we engage with the supply chain, and the motives behind investment, and how the developer and the investor plays their part in that role. So we're here to unpick that particular discussion. I've got 3 fantastic speakers to join our panel. each are going to have 5 minutes to just lay out their thoughts. And in fact, what I'll do is just ask each of you to briefly introduce yourselves. I'll go from right to left. So Ed, do you want to just introduce yourself quickly, and then we'll pass on to Mariana and Anna.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Ed Dean. I'm the Sustainability Director at Landsec. I have oversight for our sustainability programme at Landsec, and that's across E, S and G, but the start of my career was very much working on social value. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you, Ed. Mariana.
Thank you. I'm a sustainability consultant at Savills. I focus mainly on social value, health and well-being, and strategic sustainability support to our clients. And
Fantastic.
Again, looking forward to this.
And Mariana, you might just need to put your microphone just slightly closer. You're just slightly, okay. That's better. If you hold it up, that's great. Thank you. Okay. And then Anna, finally.
Yeah, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anna McChesney-Gordon, the head of consultancy at Social Value Portal. So leading on any of our work around planning and development in the real estate sector.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anna. Okay, so let's kick off with each of our panelists, just 5 minutes sort of talking about their role in the sort of unlocking of value through the asset. So let's kick off with Ed, who's going to give us a sort of investor Landsec view on this. Ed.
Thanks, Guy. I thought I would just, in a very quick elevator pitch, just let you know, for those that may not be aware of who Landsec are. We're one of the largest real estate companies in Europe, and our portfolio spans across some of the most recognisable and successful real estate. So you may not know it, but the Piccadilly lights in London's West End, through to the regeneration. You know it?
Well, I didn't know that. That's great, Ed. Piccadilly lights.
I'll leave it there. Through to the regeneration of London's Victoria, and then outside of London, we own and manage some of the most recognisable real estate, including Westgate in Oxford, the shopping centre, and Trinity in Leeds. And with a sustainability lens, we aim to really take a leadership position across both environmental and social impact. And that's obviously where we're going to focus on today. So I thought I'd just take you through what we've done at Landsec in terms of social value. So over the last decade or so, we've had a number of social sustainability programs in place. But it wasn't really till about 2 or 3 years ago that we felt the need that we could actually start to measure in a more intelligent and informed way the impact we're having in the communities in which we operate. So Landsec really focuses on 4 key areas of social sustainability. We have a very well-established community employment program, which seeks to work with those more further from the job market, including ex-offenders, those that were previously homeless, NEETs, and many other candidates. And over the last sort of 10 years or so, we've had a corporate commitment to help 1,200 candidates from those backgrounds back into work. And it was a really honourable, really fantastic programme. But once we fulfilled that commitment back in 2018, we felt it was a really opportune moment to kind of realign our programme and look at how we could, look to measure the impact that we have. So along with our employment programme, we also have a well-established volunteering programme, which looks to engage the commercial expertise of our colleagues and make sure that we're engaging with, absolutely the right people and the right community partners within the communities in which we operate. And then also charity partnerships seeks to look and address issues that are really important, both for society, but actually that are material for Landsec. And the final piece looks at our education programs, and that's really about inspiring the next generation of young people into careers within our industry. And all of these 3 areas really have a kind of a direct material impact for Landsec itself. So be that across community employment, we know that we're addressing a key skill shortage within the construction and property related industries. Education programs looks at how we can kind of drive social mobility within our business, but equally make sure that we're kind of can drive the diversity and inclusion within our business. And we know that we've got quite big strides to take in that, but doing it at a young age and working with school age children, we feel that we can have a real material impact on that. So moving across, I guess, to what we've done in terms of social value is that we, following a kind of a big assessment of all of the areas of work that we cover, we committed to create £25 million of social value by 2025 as a key corporate commitment through our 4 social sustainability programs. And the really powerful thing we've been able to do is to actually link that with the key KPIs for our business. So we kind of get top-down buy-in through all of those programs. And last year was the first year that we took that on, and we were able to create just under £5 million of social value, which was on target and on track to hit that. Now, I know that it's not just about being able to quantify that in financial metrics. We understand very much that it's about the non-financial side of things too. But actually what we have found is it's a really powerful tool to be able to engage senior leadership team, especially amongst, you know, a quite a commercially minded business like Landsec. To be able to put value on some of the impacts that we've had has been a really, really powerful tool. And I'm getting like a virtual kick under the table that I may well have hit my 5-minute mark. So I will, on that note, hand over to Mariana and hope that, yeah, look forward to any questions that might come from there.
Just before we do that, Mariana, just two secs, and I just pick up on one thing. Ed, you just mentioned the KPI link with the, and just before we ask Mariana, just why has that been so important to link the KPIs to what you're doing? Well,
I think like anything, so apologies, I'm not a very good chair because I just handed straight over to the wrong person.
Don't worry.
Yeah, I think being able to link performance around social value to a key KPI just really demonstrates how we can embed this right across the business. I think if we were just to put a corporate commitment out there and sort of crack on, and you know, I've got 2 full-time members of staff that look after that internally, and that's great, but it's quite challenging to be able to do that. If we're able to leverage that kind of power and say this as directly linked to a remuneration and a key performance indicator, that really does drive buy-in, I think. So I think, yeah, it's been a very powerful tool.
We're going to pick this up in the chat or the discussion later around the challenges and how we unlock those challenges. So we'll spend a bit more time on that later. Mariana, the floor is yours. Tell us about what Savills are, how Savills are approaching this.
Lovely, thank you. So as I said earlier, I'm a sustainability consultant at Savills, and social value is one of my main areas of focus. So I promote social value within the business, and I also measure social value of assets in construction and in operation in partnership with the Social Value Portal. I also work closely with our property management teams made up of surveyors and site teams who manage high-profile office buildings, helping them drive sustainability improvements on an asset-by-asset level, and that includes raising awareness of social value and social value measurements. And my background is in property management and mobilization. Just a little bit about Savills. We are a property transaction advisory, property management and consultancy firm with about 5,000 employees in the UK. Our sustainability team has 20 consultants, and we are part of a wider sustainability and energy hub of 80 professionals, providing consultancy to real estate clients such as developers, institutional investors, and REITs. And I've recently completed a master's in corporate responsibility and sustainability, and I decided to do my dissertation about how the real estate sector can generate social value through the operation of buildings. It's a topic that we see a lot of industry reports about recently, but there wasn't anything academic about it. So that's why I decided to go for it. And I also feel, like Guy mentioned earlier, we are missing a massive opportunity to create positive impact through asset management. There's a lot more academic work about social value in construction, but buildings are under construction for a few months to a few years, and the operational phase of the assets lasts between 20 to 30 years. So it can create a lot more impact by working on assets already in operation. And I thought I'd share a couple of findings from my dissertation. So the first is that the lack of a standard definition of social value is hindering reporting and benchmarking consistency. For example, when people are asked in tenders how they intend to generate social value, it's difficult to know what constitutes social value and therefore how they can generate it. And people understand social value differently. I know there are a couple of definitions being worked on by industry bodies, and there's also a British standard coming up, a guide on understanding and enhancing social value, which is currently in progress. And I'd also say that the national TOMs provide a good social value framework that companies can use to understand what counts as social value and what doesn't. And the second is that generally, there's a lack of engagement with the external community. So interventions are planned by internal stakeholders like suppliers and employees, but usually there's no engagement with local partners until the interventions are agreed. And the local community becomes a receiver of those interventions instead of contributing towards the decisions. And I feel like that's a missed opportunity to engage with external stakeholders to understand what the needs of the local community actually are.
Great, thank you, Mariana. There's a couple of interesting points there, actually. I think the final point, which I always find very interesting, it'd be good to have a discussion around this after Anna's finished, which is, how do we ensure that communities don't feel done to and they are done with, i.e., much more in collaboration. I think I think the other thing that's quite interesting is, I'm glad you mentioned the TOMs, because we like to think that there is some form of definition. But I was intrigued. Just one question for you before I bring Anna in. Did your job, as leader in social value, exist 2-3 years ago?
No, it didn't.
So
it's a very new topic.
Yeah, so we are seeing a shift, aren't we?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's a lot more focus on CSR, on community impact, especially. Like we've seen a shift, more focus on carbon emissions in the last few years. Now we are seeing a lot more on social value.
Okay, great. Well, we'll pick that up after we've heard Anna speak. And Mariana, just when you're in the panel, just make sure that that's it. We just need to hear you directly into the microphone. That's all. Anna, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much. So most of you are probably familiar with Social Value Portal, seeing as though you've dialed into the Social Value Portal webinar. But for those that are new to us, I thought it would be good just to give you a quick introduction. So we help organisations to measure and report the social value that they're generating through using our online portal, so an online platform, and also a range of consultancy services that we offer. And I mean, Mariana's already picked up on it, but the sort of lack of clarity about what social value means often comes up. But just to make it clear from the off that social value very much captures the social, economic and environmental benefits that could be generated through any kind of activity or initiative or corporate programs. So it covers much of the core elements of traditional ESG reporting as well. In terms of measurement, you've heard the TOMs be mentioned a couple of times, so I'll just give you a little bit of background to those. So the Social Value Portal designed an approach to measurement and reporting of social value that actually puts a financial value on the activities and interventions that are undertaken by an organisation. So it means that companies or any kind of organisation can start to report on their social value in financial terms. So that's how Ed and his colleagues at Landsec managed to arrive at a corporate social contribution target in financial terms. So this is done through the national TOMs, which is shorthand for the National Social Value Measurement Framework. And it's called the TOMs because it's built around a set of themes, outcomes, and measures, hence the TOMs. Just so you're aware, it's an open source framework, and document can be downloaded by any organization via our website. I'm sure someone from the team can put a link into the chat. And it was developed up by Social Value Portal and a cross-sector group called the National Social Value Task Force. And there's all sorts of information in the download about how it was actually developed, how the different measures have been arrived at, and how the values have been arrived at as well. So it's really important to us that all of that's laid out and there's total transparency there. But in terms of how this actually relates to measuring the social value of assets, obviously to arrive at a social value of an asset or a social value of anything, you have to have an approach to measurement. So the national TOMS was always historically used very regularly by local authorities and private sector organisations. But a couple of years ago, we were essentially set a challenge by Legal and General Investment Management to come up with a way of measuring the social value of their real estate assets, so they could understand the social return on their investments as well as the traditional financial return. So the approach that we have taken, and it was referenced by Guy earlier, the approach that we've taken is to really dive into the detail of how those assets, once they're in use, ultimately are managed and supplied and occupied. So we adapted that national TOMS framework so it was slightly more relevant to the real estate industry, and developed an approach where we collect data from the property managers who are there day in, day out in those assets and in those buildings, and their core suppliers, but also, where possible, collecting data from the businesses that are occupying that building as well. And the questions that we would be asking are always around things like jobs and skills and community engagement, and where they're spending their money, how they're spending their money, and also, importantly, any environmental initiatives that they've got in place. So we have all the questions that we want to ask, and we have a way of capturing the data through our online portal. And once we've done that, we're then in a position to create an annual asset report with all of the information in there in financial and non-financial terms. So we could say, we estimate that this shopping centre or this office generated £4 million of social value in the last year, and the report would detail how we arrived at that number. And it would also give a percentage of percent social value in comparison to the rental yield in that year as well. So having collected all of that data and created that report, we're then in a position to do some benchmarking and present our client or partner with what we think their delivery compares to sort of industry standards and what we would expect to see, so that we can actually lay out some steps and recommendations for what they could do going forward to drive more positive outcomes going forward. So often we would conduct a local needs analysis or do research into different types of organisations that they could partner with to drive outcomes, because again, a point Mariana made, social value is really maximised, and it's more meaningful when it is addressing local needs and you are engaging with different kinds of organisations in the community to deliver those outcomes. So that's the approach that we've been taking with clients. I mentioned Legal and General, but also with UBS and others, and obviously with Savills, we work in partnership with Savills for some of their clients too. And we've measured assets in different classes, so offices, leisure, retail, industrial, as well as some residential, although the approach is a little bit different there. And essentially, it's all part of trying to understand the total value that could be generated by an asset throughout that life cycle. So in an ideal situation, we would be involved throughout the planning stage to set a social value strategy, and then actually measure the construction and see what we can do to drive outcomes through that phase. And then once the construction is finished and it's in operation, then we can start to measure the value that's generated throughout that in-use period by the property managers and suppliers and the occupiers. And always, obviously, with the aim of doing more year on year and having an improvement plan in place. That's how you'll drive the best outcomes for the local area and for society more widely. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Anna. Good. Okay, we've got a few questions coming in, not enough yet. So if you could all start putting your questions in, that would be great. We've got a few coming into chat. If you could put them in the Q&A rather than chat, it would just make my life as the chair slightly easier, but I can multitask, so it's fine. But chat would be slightly easier. So let's just dive into a couple of points that were made. I'm going to kick off. Actually, I'm going to start off by just talking about value. because I just wanted to spend a little bit of time, Ed, and then Anna and Mariana, just about whether or not, or how important you think it is that, however we measure social value, that we find a way of expressing it as a pound sign. And I think the not obviously, but the counter argument to this is that if we are only dictated by pound, perhaps we miss those little things that might, in theory, not have a lot of value to however you measure it, the society, but actually to the individual make a really big difference. And because we're focusing on the pound, we miss the detail of the narrative and the story. So perhaps, Ed, I could just ask you first, and you did talk about the combination of the two, but if you could explain sort of how you balance that what might appear conflicting sort of criteria off against each other.
Yeah, thanks, Guy. It is indeed a really good challenge. I guess for us, we are able, I think, by putting a financial value to kind of convey our work to specifically, I would say, probably to an investor audience, being able to quantify the impact that we're having in the communities in which we operate through our social sustainability programs. Having a corporate commitment with pounds and pence for that is not dissimilar to being able to demonstrate the carbon reduction, or the energy reduction across our other kind of programs. So I think it's helpful in that sense, but I think we're very, very cautious in that approach, and we really want to bring to life the actual just impact that we're having. So, for example, it is easier to quantify, for example, employment. That's an easier thing for us to do. But for example, we also have a very well established education program, which doesn't necessarily generate a financial value, but we know, for example, that 97% of the candidates felt better and more engaged to progress their career, or we know the numbers of people that are from Black or minority ethnic backgrounds or in receipt of free school meals. So there's lots of other information that we can capture that's also really important and also doesn't have a pounds and pence sign. But it is a very difficult balancing act. I'm not saying we've got it perfectly, but having a corporate commitment and being able to kind of put a value against it is helpful, because we're then able to kind of divert resource where we potentially have the most impact, if that makes sense.
It's quite interesting that you've declared that target to be £25 million, right, worth of social value. I mean, and I guess the danger that we can all fall into is just, it's like one ring to rule them all. This is one number to rule them all, and yet behind all that sits all those fantastic programs. Some of the things you can measure from a value-based point of view, and some others you can. But I guess it's about helping the board understand the scale of social. Is that right?
I think that's exactly right. Yeah. And I think we're still going to a degree on that journey. But yeah, it is a difficult challenge for us. But I think it has been a useful tool in order for us specifically to be able to divert resource where we know we can have big impact as well.
Mariana, let's just sort of continue with this theme in your research, which is kind of interesting. And I'll stick with that for a moment before I get into the Savills stuff. Where did you sit with this, with the value-based sort of analysis? Did you come out of your thesis thinking that being able to do a value on it is important, whether it's irrelevant? What's your thinking of that, having done this piece of research work?
Yeah, so as part of my research, I didn't want to focus on measurements because I know there's a lot of work already being done on that. But yes, I agree, it's very important to measure it. I think having that pound value makes your social value more comparable with other assets and helps drive improvements as well. I think it's very important for that. But I agree with Ed, it needs to be about the qualitative data as well. So understanding how an intervention impacts someone's life, how it can change someone's life. I think that's very important as well. So it shouldn't be just the numbers. I think it should be both combined.
And Anna, I mean, you're involved in a lot of planning submissions, you know, on buildings, and you know, and also the asset measurement, obviously, which we're here to talk about. And you know, we're reporting on value as well as the non-financial elements. What's your view about how best to get the balance on reporting on those two, and why does someone like L&G like a number, and is it right that they do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they like a number because they're reporting back up to investors who want to know about numbers. So talking in financial terms and pounds and pence is a useful starting point. But we would always say that we don't want people to sort of just be wedded to the pound number. It's a useful way to spark people's interest and get them thinking and talking about stuff. But actually, we want people to understand the detail and what has actually been delivered. So, you know, Ed spoke about a corporate commitment of £25 million of social value, and it's, you know, it's sort of fairly arbitrary until people dive into what sits behind that. And what sits behind that is a significant number of different types of job outcomes for different people, a vast volunteering program and other charity partnerships and things like that. So it gets people thinking, I wonder what they're going to do to achieve that. And that's where the interesting conversations come.
Okay, it's interesting. One of the things that this kind of leads me on to is just understanding the S and ESG, and a few of, well, three of you have mentioned investors, and it's clear to me, and certainly from, you know, Ed's presentation, and in fact all of you, that the investor community is, you know, it's becoming much more interested in the S and ESG. I guess to some extent, the E has been, I wouldn't say it's done and dusted. I mean, you know, we've worked out how to measure it, and we know we've got to get to net zero, right? So we've got a very clear target, and the question is whether we get to net zero by 2050 or 2030 or 2038, depends on what type of business that you are and what you're willing to commit. Just on the sticking with the S and the investor community, Ed, I'll start here. Why is it, do you think, that the investor community is getting more interested in the S and ESG now as a driver?
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear. Funny enough, about 20 minutes before joining this, I was on with an investor talking about our ESG program. And I think, you know, if you'd asked me that maybe 2 or 3 years ago, that it would be maybe once a month, and now they're more like once a week in terms of their level of engagement. I think from my perspective, investor sentiment has absolutely shifted. You know, if we take Landsec as an example, you know, we've just come out with our new purpose around connecting communities, sustainable places, and realizing potential. And when you come out with a mantra like that, I do think that you do need to be able to kind of start to back that up, and you can no longer sort of decouple profit and purpose. And I think investors are starting to really get wind of that and understand it as well. So being able to kind of demonstrate, you know, what impact you're having is becoming more and more, you know, vital. And, you know, the pages of our annual report are being taken up with social review and environmental review more and more on that basis.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's been sort of very clear guidance coming out of the financial reporting FRC. I forgot what the C stands for, but requiring organisations who make these you know, mission statements around purpose to link their business operations to that, delivering that purpose, as opposed to it just being a, you know, we're here to help people. You know, of course, every business is here to help people. I guess it's which people and how you help them and how you measure that. So, do you have that? You mentioned in your you know, the KPIs. Do those KPIs link to purpose as well as the executive? Then is there, and is that kind of published? Is there kind of, you pull a lever of a KPI, you know what happens? Is how does that work?
Well, we're still quite new in that. Only it came out a couple of weeks ago, Guy. But I think we're absolutely, we've already linked our kind of social value to our key performance indicators. So I think the next iteration of that work will certainly look at how we link more closely with our purpose, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's good. I think, Mariana, it'd be interesting just to hear your view. Savills have just joined Social Value Portal as a member, and you're doing that for two reasons. One is to help measure assets, but actually we're also going to help you measure the social value of the organisation itself. And I'm kind of interested, what's your motive behind that? Why bother do that when your customers will pay you to do the social value measurement of assets, but you're now doing the social value measurement of the organisation as a whole? What do you think the motive is behind that?
Thank you. So understanding our impact is a big push for us as well. So like I'd mentioned, investors are looking to understand that and minimize risks. And GRESB is something that looks into social value, for example. But as a corporate...
sorry, do you want to just explain what GRESB, not everyone on the call is going to know what GRESB is?
Yes, so GRESB is a global real estate benchmark that focuses on sustainability. Right. So a lot of assets managers report to GRESB, and they can compare their performance with peers that are of similar size and in the same location. And yeah, so GRESB is a big driver. Right. I think for us as a business and for many other similar businesses, I think workforce expectation is also a big driver. Right. Because people want to work for businesses that have a purpose, and also doing good, so implementing social value initiatives can help with workforce health and well-being, helping people feel connected to their communities. And okay. I think our occupiers face similar expectations as well.
And tell me, are you ever asked about social value when you're bidding for work? Has it yet become an issue? So it does. So tell me a bit about that.
I'm not that involved with the bidding work, I'm afraid, but I know we have a lot of questions coming about social value, about how we impact our community and how we can help.
Yeah. So it's not only about the sort of talent retention and attraction, doing the right thing. It's also about the very fabric of our business, which is just winning work, which is kind of interesting. I'll come back to that in a bit. But Anna, just talk to me a bit about what you've understood to be the motives around why businesses are, working with us in the first instance. I mean, what are their drivers? Why UBS interested in measuring their assets? Why L&G, Aberdeen? What is it that's driving them, do you think, from an investor perspective?
Well, I mentioned in my sort of intro overview that a couple of years ago we were challenged by Legal & General to come up with some sort of approach to measure the social value of their assets, and that was very much driven by requests from investors to say, clearly we want to understand the financial return on investments, and that needs to remain a priority, but equally we want to understand the social return. So particularly for these investors with sort of pension funds and things like that, those are local people living in local areas, investing their pensions into assets that could be anywhere in the country in their local area, and they wanted to understand what was happening, and pretty crucially what they could do to do more going forward. So the whole reason of measuring an asset in the first place is to understand what that sort of baseline is, so that you can make more informed decisions about what to do next. And then there are other drivers, like employee engagement is a big one, sort of attraction and retention of staff. Young people coming into the workforce are have much sort of bigger opinions about the types of companies that they want to work for, and will make decisions about organizations or sectors based on their stance around sustainability, particularly environmental sustainability, and how they treat their people, what their approach is to community engagement and that kind of thing. And the final thing is around using social value measurement here as a way of reporting against the UN Sustainable Development Goals, so often called the Global Goals for Sustainable Development, or the SDGs, sort of interchangeable acronyms and things like that. But so that the SDGs are that sort of global standard and global targets and commitments for improving people and the planet, and by 2030, and organizations want to make sure that they are taking steps to address those goals and making a difference and doing things around social value and actually measuring it here. There's a clear link between those things, and we've mapped our TOMS framework, so the National Social Value Measurement Framework, to those global goals so that people can compare and see how they're contributing to those.
Okay, let's pick up a couple of questions up from the audience, which I'll just throw randomly at you. And this is a bugbear of mine, actually, but I won't tell you which way it goes. So I'll just read it out. It's from Simon Boyd, actually. So Simon says, do you believe that clients, and so I'm going to ask Ed in the first instance, and then we'll pass on to Mariana and Anna. Do you believe that clients know or consider the differences or challenges faced when reporting on social value as a contractor versus as compared to a consultant? There being two parts, and we're talking about, that phase of design and construction. I mean, naturally, there seems to be a lot of focus on the contractor, but do you think that developers, clients understand that difference? Ed?
Well, given that I am a client and a developer, I'd like to say sort of yes. We do. I mean, I guess I need to probably frame that slightly. At the moment, we're only measuring the social impact of our corporate social sustainability programs, but actually the next iteration of our work we're looking at is actually measuring through the development. We've got some quite big regeneration schemes coming up, and we're already engaging with Social Value Portal, and then obviously as we potentially pick our principal contractors and designers about how we can design in and maximize the social value from a very early stage.
And will you expect your designers to deliver social value as well as the contractors?
Well, I think if we don't, then it's an opportunity missed.
Yeah.
You can't ask me that question, I guess, from 5 years ago when we were going through our a development pipeline that has passed. But I think we're now in a much better place where we understand about social value a lot more. So I do think that we do need to try and link that. Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Anna, what's your experience of this? The sort of the difference between what we expect our contractors to do versus what the consultants get involved in.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question, and I agree with Ed that it's an opportunity missed if you sort of miss out on that phase. The length of time that is spent on a development before a contractor has even set foot on the ground throughout the planning phase, designs, the number of different consultants that are involved. If you're not trying to engage them in some sort of social value activity, then that is lost. And I know that it is, contractors are very good at generating social value, but it does help that they've got 300, 400, 500 people on the ground that can do things, a huge workforce that they can employ to deliver a scheme. But consultants you have to still employ people to do things.
So just what can the consultants do then, Anna? Let's think that we're working on Salford Crescent at the moment, and that design program is 2 or 3 years, I guess. And the design fees in total to some of the the architects and engineers will be sort of millions of pounds worth of design fee. What is it that consultants should be looking at to do you think?
Well, yeah, and just by the way, on that scheme, all the consultants in that project team, so 10 different core organizations, have to collect and report their social value data quarterly as well. So there is stuff around the types of people being employed, different schemes, like if there are apprentices involved, if there's work experience opportunities being offered. There's definitely volunteering that is happening. but also often things around in some environmental initiatives as well, making conscious decisions about how and where you get to somewhere on a contract. So all of that stuff can be tracked. But we also have, regardless of if it's on a sort of real estate development, we have this conversation a lot with different big consultancies and sort of multidisciplinary consultancies who are expected to respond to social value questions within tenders. 15-20% of the tender might be weighted on social value, and there's always, the sentiment is always that it's a bit of a struggle, but I think there are always things that can be done.
Yeah, I was quite impressed. I mean, one of the things that I really like what you're doing, Ed, is the way you have articulated your very clear programs. And I think there's some really important lessons to be learned there, in as much that you've sort of spent time and effort designing the programs. And if I get it right, there's one around volunteering, community, an interwork program, an education skills program. So you've thought, and that's where you focus your efforts. And you've also made taken the time to link those programs to what the core business is about. So can you just perhaps provide some advice to those who are on the call who are thinking, how the hell do we do this? We get these odd jobs and we're spent to do a little bit of social value. What were the motives and what was the thinking behind you guys building those programs as opposed to ad hoc social value offers on a job by job basis?
Yeah, it is a good question. I think probably the reason we've been able to develop our program, and it's been as established as long as it has been, is centered around the fact that actually each of them is addressing a material risk or has a material impact for our business. So whether that's addressing a skills shortage or using commercial expertise, which can link back to talent retention, talent engagement, education program is around diversity and inclusion, how we manage that. So I guess my advice would be is have a long hard think about what is material for your business. How can what have you got in the locker within your own business that can kind of address and add significant social value in that regard?
What I find really interesting about your programs is that ultimately Landsec is a people business, right? I mean, you engage others to do the bricks and mortar, but you're in a way directly comparable to consulting businesses, aren't you?
Yeah,
because you're just people. So I think there's definitely something there to be shared, isn't there, about that strategic thinking and investment into programs.
Yeah, but I think that also just is you're able to articulate about the programs if it is material for the business. I think doing something sort of ad hoc or is much more difficult to sort of get behind that, whereas if you can kind of bring it back and directly link it to your core purpose, I think that's very helpful.
Have you been challenged around the business case for that? I mean,
yes, we're always challenged because invariably we do have to sometimes ask for capital or resource. But I think being able to then say, look, our community employment program generates X amount of value, and specifically working with ex-offenders or those previously left a hostel or from a homeless background, that really we know that generates significant impact. So the business case is there for us to really deliver on it.
Okay, that's really good.
Been useful having that. I mean, that's one of the reasons we started measuring social value. We used to just say we've helped over 1,000 people back into work, but now we're able to cut by how many people have been from an offending background and what impact that has had for them. So it's actually probably aided the business case.
That's really interesting. Mariana, you face different challenges, and I'd just like to think about your own supply chain and bring it back to the assets. And what we have spoken about is how important the supply chain is in delivering value for assets, and how we might embed that into procurement. What's your experience of working with your suppliers, engaging them on social value and getting them to deliver social value on your behalf?
So I come from a very privileged position that most of the clients and assets I deal with are high profile assets with healthy budgets.
Yeah.
So for them, they have a very good relationship with the service providers, and if they ask the service provider to take part in an initiative, or if they ask the provider to suggest something, it usually happens, and there's usually no cost concerns. I think from the point of view, the time is an issue. Having the resource to plan the initiatives and to record data once everything is done is a concern, but the engagement with suppliers is not usually that difficult,
really?
not in my experience.
They're usually quite open and receptive to it.
Yeah, they are, because it's good for them as well. They can help. It's good for their workforce working in the building, and they can also report that social value as part of the CSR report, or showing that they are helping their clients to deliver social value.
Okay.
I think it's much more difficult with occupiers.
Okay, Anna, I'm going to change the subject slightly now, bring in another question, or comment from Tim Reed, actually. How reliable is the benchmarking given the lack of standard definitions, and how are you sourcing data with which you compare the assets commented in your asset report? So that cuts to, how we do our work, and the benchmarking tool we've generated and the asset comparison. Is it valid, given that Mariana said there's no proper definition out there?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. And it's a very appropriate question to ask, because it's important to know what is being used to compare different things and sort of set those benchmarks. And it is a sort of immature process. As we've said, no one was really thinking about the social value of an asset until relatively recently. But so we've got various benchmarks that we use from the different projects that we've measured ourselves through our portals. So this year we would have measured probably just over 100 different assets across different classes. So we're beginning to build up a much better picture of what good looks like. And obviously 100 is still quite a small number, but what good looks like, and what you should expect from an industrial asset versus a retail asset, for example. And then there are some other industry standards and things. It is more straightforward during the construction phase because there's much more data out there. But there are some industry standards, particularly around environmental benchmarking, that can be drawn on. But we also use our own sort of recommendations as Social Value Portal for what we have seen, what we would expect, because we always want to challenge organisations to do more. And in our reports, again, we would always be very transparent and clear about where the numbers have come from and why we've set specific targets or KPIs for people to do moving forward. But hopefully, as the years go on and we keep measuring more and more, then we'll keep gathering more information that can feed into the benchmarks. Okay.
Just for the last few minutes, to just slightly shift the focus again to the occupier. We've been speaking about, the role of the investor, how consultants, contractors do their stuff, the supply chain. But as I mentioned in my introduction up front, it could be as much as 70 or 80% of the value is generated by the occupier. Perhaps I'd just start with Mariana, because, Savills as a managing agent will often be that interface between the occupier and the owner. What role do you think the workplace facilities manager, the property manager has in unlocking an occupier's ability to deliver value to communities?
So do you mean the facilities manager who is managing the building, or within the occupier organization?
Oh, so it's your role with Savills, who's a managing agent.
Yeah, so I think mainly it's awareness of what social value is. I think a lot of occupiers are generating a lot of social value, but they don't know it falls into the social value umbrella. It may be labeled as the CSR program. And I think the role of the property manager or facilities manager is also to make sure they get in touch with the right people in the occupier organization. Because sometimes if it's a big company, they will have their own facilities manager, they'll have their own CSR manager, they'll have their own HR people. So usually the property manager only deals with the facilities manager. So having the right contacts, being able to also talk to the CSR manager and HR, able to unlock more opportunities.
Right. And do you think there's a responsibility on the property manager to make those, or broker the links between, you know, the council, for instance, organisations, the community, and the occupier, who won't always be doing that? What do you think that role might become?
Yeah, I think there is, because the property manager liaises with so many occupiers in the building, so they can, if they can go out and engage with a local partner, with the local council, maybe with the business improvement district, they can bring that information into the occupiers and help them translate what that means to them and how they can affect change.
Yeah,
I think
okay.
it's an important role.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. And I think, just sticking, Ed, on the occupier piece, because occupiers, you know, sometimes difficult to engage. Do you think that before an occupier signs a lease, it ought to say in the lease that they're going to, you know, maximise social value for communities, the same way as they might have commitments around a travel plan or, you know, various other commitments? Do you think that, or, you know, green lease, do you think we should have a social lease?
I mean, yeah, that maybe, and that would be the dream ticket, perhaps. I don't think we're quite there yet. What I would say from a Landsec perspective is that with our, we call customers, you know, be it tenants or whatever, occupiers, whatever it might be, but we're more often than not, they're very receptive to engaging around maximising the impact. But it's just, you know, what is potentially material for a customer that's in one of our buildings is perhaps different from us. So as long as they're going about and, you know, doing some of this great work, you know, we're not really territorial in it. But what we have found is it's also acted as quite a good engagement tool. So we've been able to kind of, you know, engage with some of our customers by saying we're delivering X program here or Y here, and that's been able to be, you know, as a great engagement tool as well. So, you know, we've been overwhelmingly, I think it's been more positive. People, you know, businesses want to do more in their local communities.
And Anna, what experience have you had on this matter of occupier engagement?
Yeah, it's definitely the more difficult aspect of understanding what's happening within an asset, because there isn't that direct link. You know, it's straightforward to get data from the property management team, who can then, as Mariana said, get data from the supply chain because they have that relationship with each other. Whereas with occupiers, the best in terms of quantity and also quality of data that we have seen from occupiers comes where there has been a really strong relationship between their property management team and the occupiers there, so that they feel as though they are engaging in a survey or an initiative that they can get behind. So I think it really does come down to those property managers sort of engaging with the occupiers, unlocking the data, trying to figure out what could be done, and also helping them understand things that they could do together. So if property managers can come up with different schemes or initiatives that occupiers can get involved in, rather than leaving them to come up with their own stuff, then they're more likely to get involved, and it sort of fosters that sense of community within the asset as well.
Good. So we've got just 1 minute, so I'm going to allow you each sort of 30 seconds. We might go over 30 seconds over, just to kind of tell us, give a little bit of sort of pre-Christmas advice on the basis that we're heading into 2021, recover and renew. We want 2021 to be the year of social value. Not that I've asked the Prime Minister yet, but it's on my list, Christmas list, to ask Father Christmas to make that happen. What's the piece of advice that we're giving to our audience out there for next year? Ed, do you want to kick off with that thought?
I've never been invited to give like some gems of wisdom, so this is it's going to be new for me. But I think the main thing I would say is that we need to get away from this kind of this mindset, and I think we broadly are, that we need to decouple kind of profit and purpose. I think can be doing these things completely in tandem. There is always a business case for it. I think, yes, we have had a exceptional year with COVID, and how we respond and emerge from that has shone a lens on a lot of this activity. But you know, when you engage with stakeholders, this you can just decouple profit and purpose. So I'll leave it there because that feels like a good gem.
Okay, thank you very much, Ed. Mariana, what's your thoughts on that?
So I think it would be something along the lines of helping the people who are actually delivering social value deliver what they are motivated to deliver. So if they care about a specific type, if they care about volunteering, help supporting them to volunteer, for example.
Okay, that's good. Making it easier and helping the corporate, the people in the corporate to do what they want to do.
Yeah,
Unlocking
absolutely.
that potential. That's great. Thank you. And then finally, Anna, what's your bon mot for us all?
Well, obviously I work for Social Value Portal, so it's also, I'm keen for 2021 to be the year of social value. But I think as we go into next year and everyone is looking at ways to recover from COVID, the social value piece is going to be even more important. So organizations making really conscious decisions about who they spend their money with, how they spend their money, who they choose to employ, how they engage with employees, how they engage with communities can actually make a very material difference to how those different communities and people and our society as a whole can respond from this shocker of a year. So I would agree.
Brilliant. Well, with that, I would like to call this to an end, and my thanks to Mariana from Savills, Ed Dean from Landsec, and Anna McChesney-Gordon from Social Value Portal for and of course the audience for the questions and the chat that you engaged in. And so thank you very much. And as my final thought, I am wishing you all a very happy Christmas and a happy New Year. And I can say that now because it is, well, it's just 15 days away. So to Christmas Eve at least. So that's fantastic. So look, enjoy yourselves, have a good Christmas break, and we'll see you on the other side. Thank you very much indeed.